My 14-year-old son was shot and killed 3 years ago while visiting family on his spring break by another teen that gained access to an unsecured firearm. Just Wednesday, my husband and I were fixing dinner. We had our crock pot on low, and I said I wanted something sweet from the store. And he said, let's just run a quick errand. And he looked at me and he said, are you gonna turn the crock pot off? And I said, no, why? And he said, it's a possibility we might not make it back. At that moment, I realized that what is happening is not normal, and we shouldn't accept it as being normal, and we shouldn't have to live like this. If elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Well, first of all, let me say, I suspect some of you have lost someone, a child, whether it's to gun violence or another tragedy. And those of you who have, like you have, Giovanni, let me start off by saying how much courage it takes you to be here. Because every single time when you've lost a child, whether it's to an automobile accident and a highway like my wife and daughter, or my child coming home from Iraq with terminal cancer, it's hard to talk about it. You relive it. I didn't have the courage to do what you're doing when, back when I got elected to the Senate, a tractor trailer broadsided my wife's car with my 3 children and killed her and she and my daughter. I was in the Senate. I was on the Highway Committee. I could have held hearings on highway safety. I didn't have the courage you had. And when the president asked me to head up the cancer moonshot after my son had just died, it was really hard to do. So I want to start off by thanking you for your courage. I really mean it. I really. And though they won't believe it, the time will come when you remember them and you get a smile before a tear. And so that's what I'm hoping for you sooner than later. Folks, I've taken on the NRA nationally, and I've beaten them. I got the assault weapon ban passed. We got the limited number of clips, bullets you could have in a clip of a gun. We've been in a position where I was the guy that led the fight on the Brady bill, the background checks. And in our administration, the president asked me to lead the effort on efforts to try to get rational gun safety put in place. In the case where what happened to your son happens to so many people, so many kids, the idea that we can't control and don't require people to have trigger locks on their guns, or more importantly, I introduced legislation and I will continue to pursue it. We have the capacity right now to make sure that no gun can be fired unless it has your biometric print on it. The cell phone, those of you who have the older cell phones, how do you turn it on? With a thumbprint, right? With a thumbprint. Now, if that technology exists for that reason, why in God's name can't every single solitary weapon being sold in America? Why? Why is it such that we can't require, without violating anyone's Second Amendment right, that every single weapon sold the trigger can only be pulled by the person who has the biometric marker to pull it? Imagine how many lives we'd save. And so, what I'm going to do, if I am your president, if you choose me to be your president, is take what you have turned from a cause into a movement. Things have changed. They've changed fundamentally. Because we're not only any longer just, Giovanni, talking about the major things that have to be done relating to dealing with gun violence in America. We have to start to help educate the American public. That's what you're doing. I went up to Sandy Hook when it happened. I've worked with the Sandy Hook Promise. Some of you may be part of the Anybody from Sandy Hook Promise here? Well, guess what? The impact on that was profound. But what happened was an awful lot of people, it sort of passed by. And then we had what happened in Florida. But what's turning out now is there's a movement beginning. Because people are starting to talk about the things that go beyond whether or not someone can pull a trigger, who can own a gun. You realize that I spoke in London recently with the International Psychiatric Association. The single most at-risk generation in terms of their mental stability and whether or not they are, in fact, engaged in significant anxiety is the so-called Z generation, the 15 to 25. They're more concerned about being shot going to school or a supermarket, like your husband said, than they are before. It's costing the American public over $240 billion a year because of all the consequences that flow from gun violence. We don't talk about those things. We let people know, let your neighbors know, if we educate the public beyond just the obvious carnage, all the costs to our society. 24% of young people in that same age category witness gun violence. And you'd think, well, that would mean they'd never want to own a gun. But it's like violence against women, the legislation I wrote. We learned a lot. We've got to change the culture. People who witness violence against their mothers are significantly more likely to engage in violence themselves. So what's happening? There's a significantly greater chance that anyone who witnesses gun violence will, in fact, engage in using guns in a violent way. It's completely counterintuitive. But the American public doesn't know that. They don't know a lot of the things that I don't have time to talk to you about here. But as President of the United States, I guarantee you, if you know anything about my background, this has been the fight of my life along with violence against. We have to change the culture, the attitude of how we think about this. Do you realize that when I passed the Violence Against Women Act, we weren't even allowed to have the CDC study whether or not it had any impact. Just like we can't allow the study of the impact of gun violence on American society. The study. And think of all the young people, not just in mass violence shootings in schools and what we saw recently, but in neighborhoods that are bad neighborhoods, tough neighborhoods. They see it every day, drive-by shootings. You know, I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Iraq as Vice President of the United States, as well as as the Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. We talk about post-traumatic stress. Why do we think it does not impact on our society today and our children today? There's serious, serious post-traumatic stress going on for all these kids who witness this, or even don't witness this, know of it. But when we start to tell the American people about this, which you're doing, and I'll stop now, but they start to talk about the ancillary impacts on society, then we're going to begin to really change the culture. The Second Amendment, no amendment is, in fact, absolute. You cannot stand up in this hall and yell fire. That's not freedom of speech, because they know the consequence of yelling fire, there'll be a stampede and some will be hurt.
Let's get to some questions, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've got a group.
There's a lot of things I'll do as your president on the gun violence. I promise you, it's here. Starts here with me.
I got a group dying to ask you some questions.
Dying to answer.
So, first, let's go to one of our Iowa volunteers, Tracy.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Tracy.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I am a proud Iowan, and I'm a mother, and I'm also a gun owner. But I'm here today to talk to you as a mom's volunteer because the NRA doesn't speak for me as a gun owner. You've talked many times about how dangerous it can be when felons, domestic abusers, or children get access to firearms. You've talked about the secure storage of firearms. You've also talked about smart gun technology. We know that these things can help reduce school shootings and suicides. As president, how would you address safe storage and smart gun technology?
Two ways. Number one, you realize we have the technology to do this now. As a matter of fact, several gun manufacturers produce some of these weapons that require biometric image to be able to pull the trigger. They actually put them in several outlets. And guess what? The NRA said they're going to boycott them. They will not, in fact, allow that to happen. And so what they do, they took them off the shelves. I would move to make it a law that you have to, over time, because we can afford to do it, have all future weapons. It's going to take, it will not get done immediately, but begin to make the case to the American people that there's no violation of your rights if, in fact, you have to pass a background check and you're the one and only one that can pull that trigger. In addition to that, I think it's really important that we rely on you. I've met with every single parent of Sandy Hook. I met with all the parents, and the kids came to see me from down in Florida. I've spent the time with them. And guess what? They're beginning to, they're telling their stories. And they're telling their stories, and it's becoming real. It's not something out there. It's something that touches the hearts of ordinary people, and they realize this is my neighbor. This is who I am. This is who I'm with. And lastly, the thing that is really important here is that, we, the only outfit in the world, excuse me, that's not true. The only outfit in the United States, only manufacturers that exempt, with few exceptions, from being sued for their activities are the gun manufacturers. That law has to be repealed. It has to be repealed. Because I tell you what, and they say, well, you can't do that, Joe. Well, let me tell you something. Look what happened when we started to say that, in fact, if airlines aren't more careful about dealing with hijacking and the rest, they're going to get sued. Guess what? All of a sudden, they wanted to have folks on the aircraft that were, in fact, equipped to deal with hijackers, et cetera. We changed the way in which we do things. It is a way to change the whole attitude about how we approach these things. So the biggest and most important thing we should do, though, right away, is get assault weapons off the street again. I did that in 1994 and 1996, and we can do that again. And the other thing we have to do is when I wrote the Violence Against Women Act, we had a provision in there saying that if you were convicted of, et cetera, you could not own a weapon. I tried to extend it beyond that. And then Frank Lautenberg came along in '96, the former senator from New Jersey, and he expanded it. We should not have any exception here. If there's a stay-away order issued, no matter whether, up to now, you have to have a child by that man or you have to, in fact, be married. You should have no exception. If someone warrants a stay-away order, they should not be able to possess a weapon, period. Period. And it should be confiscated from them if they have one.
Mr. Vice President, Moms Demand Action has chapters in every single state, but we thought it might be a good idea for you to hear from someone from Delaware. So, our next question comes from our Delaware chapter of Moms Demand Action, Ashita, who is a volunteer with that chapter.
She can tell you what my son Bo did before he died on gun control in Delaware.
Good afternoon, Vice President Biden, and a very special Delaware welcome to you.
Where do you live in Delaware?
Wilmington.
Wilmington, okay.
I have a question for you regarding mass shootings that have occurred, like in El Paso and Dayton, often jolt the nation and shock the conscience. But daily gun violence is ripping apart too many of our cities, and in particular affects Black and Latino communities. What would you do as president to address city gun violence, and how would you use federal funds to do so and inspire states to do the right thing? Thank you.
Well, first, thank you. First of all, the most celebrated and frightening things people see are these mass shootings. But every single day in Wilmington, Delaware, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and throughout the United States of America, more people are killed in the streets, particularly in tough neighborhoods, than anywhere else. You can go in Wilmington, Delaware, and I can sit with you if we do it quietly, and you can see the van pull up knowing who's selling the weapons. You know it. It exists. And what are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? We should be doing several things. Number one, in the cities, we should be providing alternatives for kids to be on the street. Whether or not no, I really mean this. Think about this now. People want to stay out of harm's way, but they also don't want to get dragged in. But in neighborhoods, regardless of where they are, poor neighborhoods and cities, there's an awful lot of pressure to get people engaged in activities or own a gun. Yeah, man, I'd like a gun. I can do that. Give them an alternative to get out of harm's way. Provide for after-school programs. What we should be doing is, and one of the things I propose, increasing significantly doubling the number of mental health professionals that are in schools. Teachers can tell kids at the front end whether or not they need help. We should also be changing the way and having community health centers for mental health so people can, in fact, have access to the help they need. We should, in fact, do what we did in Delaware and so-called red flag laws. My son, Bo, before he died, he got the gun control legislation passed in Delaware, whereby every single solitary person every doc who has someone, anybody who's ever been institutionalized, everyone who, and you go on down the list, has to be reported to the NICS, that organization where you have to go to get your ability to own a gun, passing a background check. There's a whole range of simple, basic things that can be done that could significantly reduce the amount of the gun violence in cities. But one of them is also increasing. There used to be a thing called community policing. Community policing used to require people to be cops to be out of their cars and walk through the neighborhoods and get to know people. So there were 2 people in every vehicle. Bo used to always go down to where I used to be a lifeguard, down at Price's Run, down near the bucket. And he'd get out of the car and he'd take my grandson down. He'd watch folks playing basketball and making people in the highest crime rates in the city, because he had a presence there. He'd go up and knock on the window. A police officer say, "Get out of your car, man. Get out of your car. Get to know these people." You got to be engaged in the community. We have to have more people engaged in the community and engaged in a way that not to intimidate, but to actually get to know people. So what happens is you have people say, well, you'll get a phone call. A cop will give their personal cell phone to someone in the drugstore who owns the store. They can pick up the phone and say, there's something going down outside here, and this is what's happening. That truck pulled up. They're selling those Glocks out there now, and knowing that cop will never say who told them and gave them the tip, because they know if they gave them a tip, they're going to become a target. There's a lot of practical things that we're not doing that are easily able to be done, but it requires the federal government to have a commitment to follow through on what all of you are talking about. And it's about, again, more people, more moms in the east side of Wilmington are afraid of letting their kids out of the house to walk down the street than any other place in the community.
Let's hear from one more person from the audience, and we'll crisscross back across the country from Delaware to Iowa, and I'm going to ask Denny to take the floor. He's a volunteer with the Iowa chapter of Moms Demand Action.
Welcome to Iowa.
Good to be back.
As you've mentioned, you've been fighting the NRA for many years and have seen firsthand how it blocks policies, vital policies like red flag laws, background checks, and other laws. Gun owners know, for example, that there are times where temporarily removing a gun in a crisis situation can save lives. As president, how will you counter the influence of the NRA and ensure that we finally pass common sense gun safety laws?
Thank you for the question. Because of all of you and all that's happening, that's why we're going to win. I'll tell you why. I'm not being solicitous when I say that. What's happening now is, if you take a look, when the president asked me to put together all those executive orders for him when we were after Sandy Hook, the vast majority of people, including gun owners, agree with us. Members of the NRA agree with us. The people who are going to make a difference in terms of giving some backbone to those Republicans in particular, and a few Democrats who are afraid to take them on, are all of you. We have to go into their communities, take them on. That's why Mayor Bloomberg is doing such an incredible job. He's using his fortune and his money to increase the safety of the American people. And we should be going directly into the area, go into the teeth of the issue. Let people know exactly what's happening and what we're going to do, and we're going to vote against them. We're going to organize against them. When you show up, I watched what happened when the kids from Parkland marched up to, and I met with them, and then they went off to up on the hill when I was vice president. They went off the hill to go into those neighborhoods. All those congressmen were like, "No, I'm not here. I'm not here. Don't tell them I'm around." They're afraid of it. They should be exposed. They should be exposed for what they refuse to do because they're being intimidated by the NRA. And by the way, I said earlier in a different context, I said NRA is not the real problem, the gun manufacturers are. They're both a gigantic problem. The gun manufacturers are supplying the leadership of the NRA with their income. They are the same guys out there who are the ones who are driving it. It's all about commerce for them. The reason why they don't want what they know is rational gun policy is they'll sell fewer guns. They'll sell less ammunition. Who in God's name needs a weapon that can handle 100 rounds? For God's sake. And by the way, let me get one last thing straight. Folks, don't apologize at all about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says that we can limit who can own a weapon. They can limit what kind of gun you can own. These guys will tell you the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. Give me a break. If that's about, no, I really mean it. Carry concealed weapons. Come on. Come on. The biggest allies we have are cops. I want to tell you something. When I went up to Sandy Hook, you know who was beyond the families that lost somebody who were most